Hey everybody, Joy Wrestling, Paul Fontaine alongside JD Oliva making his triumphant return to the Fight Game Media Network. Did that intro bring back any memories?
It did actually. Seeing that, I was like, man, I have not seen this intro maybe around a year. So that kind of
Yeah.
made me smile watching that thing again.
Yeah, no, it's cool to have you back on here, and hopefully it won't be the last time. And
Definitely not.
we are here to we're going to talk about the joy of wrestling, which if this is your first time watching or listening, and I know JD, you got fans, people of the Mike and JD Patreon, which we'll talk about later, and for people that read your work on Joy of Wrestling. Or Joy of Wrestling. I screw this up all the time. I Voices of Wrestling. I called when I was trying to plug this show. I called it Voices of Wrestling on the last show I was on. So, yeah, on Voices of Wrestling, which you write for, and also host a show on their network, co-host a show on their network. But we're here to talk about your book and Gaijin. Did I pronounce that right?
Gaijin. Mhm.
Yeah,
I think so.
and a Kickstarter campaign that you're going to be doing, and anybody that doesn't know JD, you're a prolific author, written
I
many
was.
books.
I
Was
used I used to be. I have a real job now, so it takes up a lot of my time. But yeah, this will be my 13th novel.
Well, you know what? I mean, 13 novels is pretty prolific,
Yeah.
regardless of, if you once did. Yeah, because we talked about that on when I had you on the Cup of Joe with
Mhm.
Grandpa Des show. Like you were banging those out and good stuff too. Like don't get me
Thanks.
wrong. Like from what yeah. I mean, I've read passages. I don't redo a lot of reading, unfortunately, but this one sounds interesting. I
Well, I
think
hope
when this
I hope so.
Kickstarter gets going, I think I'll pick up a copy.
I appreciate that. Yeah,
Yeah.
this book is kind of written, with people like us in mind, like people who are
Oh, cool.
a little bit more in the hardcore wrestling fan. I kind of wrote it with from the perspective of somebody who kind of follows this world and like I don't know when we talk about it later I'll get more in depth, but this is definitely written as a fiction book kind of with the hardcore wrestling fan in mind.
Okay.
That's where my brain was when I was writing this. I don't do a whole lot of wrestling writing anymore. I co-host the Mike and JD show on the Voices of Wrestling Network, and I write occasionally for VOW, but I'm a high school teacher now, so that kind of
Yeah.
between the day job and grad school, it's kind of those things eat up my day. So this is kind of my return actually to promoting my work. Like I've had
Oh,
this book
cool.
done for a while, and it's just I've had an interesting year. So this is me kind of putting my feet back into it. We're launching on June 2nd. So I'm excited, man. I'm excited. I think it's the best book I've ever written. So I'm really excited to get it out there and get it in people's hands. So I appreciate you
And
letting me talk about it.
self-published, obviously, right? That's what the Kickstarter's about?
Yeah, well, I see this thing is like you say the word self-published, people go, "Oh, he's self-published." The
No,
reality
that's
is,
not a bad thing,
no,
yeah.
it's not a bad thing, and I
Yeah.
wanna talk about that a little bit because there back in the day, self-publishing was thought of as vanity publishing, and it's not like that anymore. The reality of things, if you're not James Patterson or Stephen King, if you're a fiction writer, there just isn't a lot there for you. Like the advance that you get is very minimal, and they even if you're with a big five publisher, if you're like a Midwest author like myself, you're expected to pay for your own marketing. You're expected to do your own hustling. The only thing a publisher, even a minor publisher, would do for you is they get you in bookstores. But the reality is
Yeah.
bookstores are closing every day, and over 90% of book sales in the US market alone are done through Amazon. I did a conference with a writer by the name of JD Barker, great first name, a couple years ago, and his advice. This is a dude who writes with James Patterson, who's written two of the best horror novels I've ever read. I highly recommend Dracul, the Dracula prequel he wrote. It's amazing. He said, if I were anybody, this is not just to me, this is everybody in the seminar. He's like, if I were you guys, I would just, this is what he does too. He's like, I would, unless it was life-changing money for the advance, I would self-publish. And the reality of an advance is you could get a kick-ass advance, and if you don't sell the number they expect you to, you owe that money back. So what I
Really?
like about
Wow.
100%, that's what people don't talk about with
Wow.
with a book advance. So if you don't sell what they expect you to sell, you're expected to return that money. So for someone like me that I write very niche genre stuff. Like usually what I write is like kind of supernatural thrillers, and this is a crime thriller in the world of pro wrestling. Like it's super niche. So for me, I'd rather just be in control of all that stuff and do my own thing and get my own editors and kind of
Yeah.
control everything because like no one's going to work as hard as I'm going to work for me.
Well, sure, and, I mean, I wrote a book once too, and we talked about that
Mhm.
when I had you on my other show, and mine was a fiction about pro wrestling as well, and I did the same thing 20 years ago now. But I experienced the same thing. Like for me, the cost at the time, like it was a lot of money for me to lay out to do the publishing, but I only had to sell like 100 books to make back the money I spent. And I ended up selling more than that. So I actually made a little bit of money and I still have the books. So I mean it's kind of cool. Like and when you talk about vanity, like that's probably what people are talking about. But I mean, you should have some vanity. I mean, writing a book is an accomplishment, and I'm proud of it.
You
And for
should
you
be.
to multiple books, and then now to be at the point now where you're not you're doing it as because it's something you want to do, and it's something you're inspired to do, obviously. And you and I both, we've been longtime pro wrestling fans.
Mhm.
You coach wrestling as well, right?
Yep, high school wrestling coach.
Right, and you've coached people that are in the pro wrestling business now or
Mhm.
coached with and against, right?
Yeah,
Um, you
lots,
know
man, tons.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, so for you, like, your love of pro wrestling is different from mine and is
Mhm.
different from probably other people watching, and we all have different reasons why we love it, but what you're talking about with this book, like, that's I think it's something that everybody can enjoy, in a sense, like, if you like reading, and,
I That's the goal. You write a book because I mean, like, you write a book to tell a story, and like you've got to. I'm of the mind that you should be passionate about what you do and just about everything. And I'm really passionate about storytelling specifically. Like I love like all the writing. I don't do a lot of wrestling writing anymore, but everything
yeah.
I tried to do when I was writing with Garrett or now when I write for voices, and even when I wrote for WrestleJoy, was I would try to tell a story. Like I don't really. I'm not a very good journalist. Like I don't understand journalism. Like it's nothing that I have any background in. So for me, when people say, "You're not a journalist," I'm like, "Yeah, no kidding. I'm not. I'm a fiction writer." So like I don't try to do that. Like I would try to tell a story with it. So that's kind of my natural instincts and it's kind of what I really enjoy doing. And so this is an opportunity. I mean, when you boil it down to this is a crime noir story that takes place in Japan. It just happens to be seated against the world of pro wrestling. Like our buddy Jeremy Feinstein and I were talking about X-Men last night, and that's a soap opera, right? That's a soap opera with
Yeah.
human drama. It's just set in a superhero world with people with powers, but the problems they have are super real, which is what I love about fiction, right? Is it gives you a chance to talk about these grounded things, but you do it in a way that's a little bit different and gives it a little bit more of spice and just I'm not terribly into like what we call literary fiction, which would be like just straight drama. Like I just I don't have that kind of headspace. I like doing these kind of things and putting a spin on it. So I'm doing a story about a drug dealer who also happens to be a professional wrestler. That's where
It's
my
not a
head's at.
stretch.
No, it isn't. So I mean, like I
Yeah.
don't think it's fictional, but I don't think it's entirely crazy the story I told.
Yeah,
So
yeah, no, it's plausible, which I
it's
think for a
plausible.
fiction is I mean, it's a hook.
Yeah, I hope so. I
So
hope so.
as you're reading, in your mind, you're probably maybe gonna picture someone, that you might think could be this person, you know?
There's definitely things in there that can lead you to think one or two, like have someone in mind when you're thinking of the character, which I did. I had characters in mind when I was writing. Maybe I don't describe them exactly like that when I describe them physically, but in my head, this is kind of what they look like. So,
Well, you gotta be
yeah,
careful
man,
because you don't wanna get
that's why you don't
sued.
do it. Exactly.
Yeah,
That's why you don't
exactly,
do it.
yeah.
You could think
When
about somebody, but don't quite describe them that way, which is
when I did well, and that's why you get an editor too, because when I
correct.
did my book, I literally a lot of it was based on my real life, but I had to change the names.
Mhm.
So I had an editor had to go through and make sure we caught, and he caught a lot. Like where I caught the person that a character was based on by their real name, and he had to change
That's
it. So yeah.
yeah, you can't do that. So
No,
it's
no, no.
but it's fun. That's a fun process. I enjoy it.
So, okay, so we've talked a little bit about the book,
Mhm.
and I don't want you to give away the plot or anything.
I'll
And
do
you've
it.
talked,
I'll
okay,
talk
so
about it.
it's well, Gaijin. So Gaijin is the name of a what Japanese call English wrestlers. So I
Foreigners. It's a
foreigners, yeah.
it's a derogatory term for foreigners.
You know what? To be honest, I didn't know it was
Mhm.
derogatory.
Yeah, it's like a
When
gotcha.
did you watch Shogun?
I
The
didn't
T.
actually. My wife and I
Okay.
sat down to watch the first episode. She got bored 10 minutes in,
Oh,
and, so I have to make time to go back and watch it because I liked the
it's
original. I remember watching the original back in high school.
it's slow, but it gets better,
That's what I'm
especially
told.
as you get used to the subtitles and you get to know the characters and everything. But the reason I asked is they had a different name for the English foreigner at the time, and I can't remember what it was. It was like Gaijin, but it was God, I wish I could remember. But it was like the main character, the English guy. They called him the something, and I mean, if
Mhm.
people in the chat watched, fill me in. But I didn't realize it was a negative term, and I thought that the name that they used in Shogun might be the negative. But Gaijin is definitely taken as a
It's
negative.
got
Then
it's a little bit. I mean, it's like foreigner. Like, it's not an endearing term, but it's not like saying dickhead or something like that. It's
is
just
it more like a demeaning, like they look
a
at it
little bit,
as like
a little bit,
underclass?
a little
Okay,
bit, a little
yeah, and
bit. Just different.
that's the way.
Outsider. Yeah.
Yeah, outsider. Okay, yeah, yeah, and I think they think, and again, if I'm relating it because I haven't read your book, but if I'm relating it to the show that I watched, this was
Mhm.
back, took place like 400 years ago. They thought of their class as being a higher class than everyone else. So someone coming in is just almost like how Americans treated, African Americans for a long time, like that same kind of thing, to where they were the high society and everyone was below them. So it was almost like English was primitive.
Yeah,
Um,
I
you
can
know.
see that. I don't really wanna go and talk about, like, Japanese ethnocentricities and
No,
stuff like
fair
that.
enough.
Like, it's not my wheelhouse to talk about. I specifically chose this title because it's so associated with pro wrestling, especially
Okay. Yeah.
Americans. It's so associated with Americans wrestling in Japan. So
Okay.
that's
Is the
specifically why I
protagonist
chose that
American?
book. I'll get into this. The protagonist in this book is a professional wrestler who, because of his extracurricular activities, he's got some addiction issues. He was fired from the big company, and I say that whenever I name the company in the book, I redact it. I write in big block letters, redacted. It's very clearly supposed to be WWE. Um, so he gets a chance to kind of restart his career in Japan. And he isn't sure if he wants to do it or not, but he goes anyway. And he had been there before years earlier, had a girl that he had a thing with, and that girl had a brother, and the brother is a troublemaker. And so because this guy has problems, he is forced to smuggle in 2 kilos of amphetamine into Japan.
Oh.
So that is the opening scene of our book, is him getting pulled into customs, very inspired by Midnight Express, the movie, not the tag team, where he's being questioned and trying not to freak out. And they go through his bags and they're like, "What's this?" And they pull out his mask because he's a
Oh.
masked wrestler. So that's my little thing. So basically, what the story is, this guy gets a fresh chance to restart his career in Japan with his former tag team partner, and he gets back together with his former girlfriend. And he's not sure if he wants to be a pro wrestler anymore, but he doesn't know what else to do. And then all of a sudden, he starts making a whole lot of money smuggling drugs. So
Oh.
then he decides he's going to kind of play both ends. Then he gets invited to participate in like this big G1 style tournament. So what I really like about this book is we start out with the guy. He's just a dude who's got problems, who's in over his head, but he's a likable guy. And his wrestling character, because half the book is told in kayfabe, right? Where half the
Yeah.
story is the story of wrestling, like the angles that are going on. And it's, I wrote it, and so it kind of come off like this is the announcers, the commentators are telling the story in the ring, and the character is a vile, evil heel who's a high flyer. And as the story progresses, our protagonist slowly turns into a complete and total POS
Oh,
while
okay.
his character becomes a babyface as he advances on into
Interesting.
this tournament. So the characters both, like, the two sides of his personality, completely do a 180. And he gets involved with the Yakuza, right? But
Japanese
here's
mafia for
the
those.
Japanese mafia. But the
Yeah.
Japanese mafia is very old school, and they don't want they don't want drugs on their streets. Like, it's like the Japanese mafia is very different than
Yeah.
the Japanese Yakuza, I should say, very different than the American mafia, or drug cartels and stuff like that. They don't want this. And it's very much the old school crime wave versus the new school crime wave. And so he becomes friends with this Yakuza boss who's also a sponsor. That's a big part of Japanese wrestling culture,
Hmm.
who's a fan. So like there is the give and take there of this guy getting pulled into all these different directions. And it's a fun way to look at wrestling and to tell a character drama. And it ends in an interesting place. I'll leave it at that. But yeah,
All
I'm
right.
very proud of the book. I'm a big fan of it. I wrote it, but I like it a lot.
It sounds super interesting. As you were starting, until you got to the mask, I'm thinking Matt Riddle, but you know,
To be fair,
I
I wrote all this before Matt Riddle had his problems that we all knew
okay.
about. This is completely
Oh,
fictional.
okay. Fair enough.
Nothing has influenced her. I actually finished the first draft. So I finished the first draft of this in 2022.
Oh,
This started off as a pitch to DC Comics in 2017.
oh,
I was recruited by them off my comics writing to develop a miniseries, and this was the concept I came up with. And they shepherded me for about a year in developing this concept, and then they restructured their Vertigo imprint, which was their big creator owned books, and they shut it down and basically said, hey, we're not going this way anymore. And that kind of ended, and the editor there isn't there who worked with me isn't there anymore. So this is a story I've kind of had in the back of my head but didn't really quite know how to finish for a long time. And then about 2 years ago, it hit me how to finish it, and so
okay.
now it's kind of come to life. So it's been kicking in my head for about 6-7 years,
Wow.
kind of when New Japan started getting super popular over here with the hardcore fan base, and people were following the G1, and the Kenny Omega rise is really when I started getting interest. Like when I really started getting the kernel of this idea was like when Kenny Omega started getting big. It's not like Terry was influenced by Kenny Omega, but watching
Oh, yeah,
this
yeah.
American who then he's a Canadian, but I mean watching this North American who starts off as a villain and becomes this, a heel. I'm sorry, starts as a villain, becomes this baby
Baby,
face. Is
yeah.
kind of the inspiration for that end of things. And this is just, I like writing crime fiction, so it kind of merged two things
Tied
that I
in.
really
Took
like.
your love of
Yeah.
wrestling, your love of
Hmm.
writing, and it also sounds like, I mean, based on the way you described it anyways, it sounds like it'd probably make a really cool movie too.
Probably.
But, yeah, but
I,
that's,
a
one
lot of
step
my
at a
stuff
time.
is visual. Yeah, for sure.
Mm,
Hey, I'm
yeah.
up for money if anybody wants to.
Yeah.
I think very visually. I have a background in film, background in comics, so I tend to write very visually inspired. My chapters are very much like my formal education in writing is in comics, so my
Oh,
chapters
okay.
tend to be short, tend to be they end on every one of them ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger, so there's a lot of like comics and film inspired stuff just in my prose technique. But
How
I'm
how
really
long how long's the book?
130,000 words, which is about
Ooh.
350 pages.
So it's a little long,
It's a little
but,
long. It's a little long.
yeah, but
It's okay.
yeah, yeah, no, no, I'm just, for me, like, if I buy it, I'm gonna read it, but the way I read, it might take me a year, but,
Well, that's fine. Wha
yeah, yeah,
what's gonna
but,
be what here's what I love about Kickstarter, right, is when we launch a
yeah,
Kickstarter, you're not just buying a book, it's a whole, like, campaign around it. So we're gonna have
okay.
an audiobook to go along with it. If you're more of an audiobook guy, you can purchase the audiobook, and you can
Oh,
have,
cool.
like,
You're
have
gonna
it
read
lecture
it?
because I not me.
Oh,
I don't have, I enjoy doing audio, but I don't have the kind of voice inflection and talent, quite frankly, to read my own book. I'm a big Stephen King fan, and I hated Wind Through the Keyhole audiobook because he narrated it and it was just god awful. So everyone's got a talent and they should embrace it. Now I got a guy who's going to read it and
oh,
he does
cool.
a great job. So we have that. What I'm also really proud of is like I've also included a program for the tournament because there's all these extra wrestlers in there, and
Oh,
I've kind of mocked up a program so you can actually kind of know who everybody is. Because I can't really get into the details of all these
yeah.
characters. It's a 24-man bracket, like I said, it's round robin style bracket. So we get like imagine you were to go to the Tokyo Dome and buy the program for the tournament. So that's cool. That's got the tournament brackets in it, so you can actually see the evolution of it as it progresses. So that was actually really fun to put together, and you can see kind of what the characters look like. I had a comic artist mock up what everyone's kind
Nice.
of looks like, which is really kind of cool. I'm really proud of that. And I got a couple other little short stories that are available with this book. And it's also, you can also buy every book I've ever written. So, I mean, like if you just decide to jump right in, you can just jump right in. You can spend $5 on a digital book, which is probably the way to go, to be honest with you, buy digital, or you can drop several $100s and buy everything in my catalog. You can actually be a character in the book, which is a
Oh,
super popular reward tier that we do in the Kickstarter. So you just write yourself, your description, and who you are, and I kind of insert you in the book. I've got a mask being made up too because he wears a mask, so you can actually buy a replica of the mask. So there's a lot of like fun
nice.
stuff that I was able to pull off with doing this kind of a Kickstarter campaign. I can't wait. I can't wait to get it launched in the beginning part of the month,
So it's June 2nd, which is
June
not that far
2nd.
away. 2
Couple
weeks, 2
weeks.
weeks. So, we're recording this on May 20th. I'll repost this show again at that time, and I'll post the links to your Kickstarter
Appreciate
at
that.
that time. I assume the details are not quite all finalized. You obviously don't have the link yet, but
Not
we'll,
yet.
we'll get that. We'll get that for June 2nd. So we got about 10 minutes left. I mean, we can go longer if we have to, but I also want to talk about what I went back to the beginning, the joy of
Mhm,
wrestling. And normally I let the guests do theirs first, and I do want to hear from you on this. But what I want to talk about, because I always give something
mhm.
for me in the recent past that has given me joy, and this one is different, and I don't want to embarrass you, but
I can't be embarrassed, quite frankly.
okay, well, I think you might actually be proud. What gives me joy is you and I are friends, and
Mhm,
and we're Facebook friends, and we follow each other on Twitter and everything. When you go to shows and you post pictures with your kid,
mhm,
and I love it. Like I love the pure joy of the two of you sitting together. You always take a shot, and it's you two sitting at a show, and you can see how
mhm,
much fun he's having, how much he enjoys being there, and you'll talk about it, and you'll even post about it. And sometimes your kid doesn't like it, sometimes you do, sometimes you go see it in the theater.
mhm.
And I really like. I remember the first time. I think it was the first time you brought your kid to a show, and it ended up being one where I think there was like a blood and guts or something, like it was something
It
super violent,
it was it
or
was
or
it
no,
was
there was a lot of profanity or something
something
in
like
it.
that. I forget what. Yeah,
I remember whatever it was. I was like, I DM'd you about it, and I was
I
like,
do.
I don't know, I wouldn't be comfortable bringing my kid, but hey, you do you, and as long as you talk to him and everything, and we had a conversation at that time.
Mhm,
But since then, like, I'm not looking at it that way. I'm just looking at it like, God, man, this guy's bringing his son to a show, and your son is developing his own love of pro wrestling with his dad. These are
mhm.
memories he's going to have for his whole life, and we aren't that far apart in age, but your son is like, way younger than my kids. So
Yeah,
I kind of missed that. I was a father too young, and I didn't get to share that with because I was just too busy trying to make enough money to like keep a roof over our heads and everything. And so I kind of live vicariously through you and other people. A mutual friend of ours, Chris DiPetrillo, when he posts
mhm.
pictures of his kid and stuff, that's for me. This is what brings me joy, is watching you and your son, and other people too, but you specifically, because you always make a point of posting pictures with your son. So I love that.
Um, yeah, I love hanging out with my kid. I remember I went to a show with a couple buddies of mine from coaching, and it was when Mandy, my son's 8 right now. This is probably when he was about a year old, and he goes, "When do you
Cool.
think you're gonna bring him to a show?" And I was like, "Gosh, I don't know. I hadn't thought about it." I said, "Maybe when he's like 6 or 7." And I brought him. We got him to his six. He actually went when he was 5, but it was for his 6th birthday because Dynamite was in town at the beginning of February. It was February 2022. Was the first
Okay.
time I took my son to a Dynamite. It was when we're MJF beat CM Punk in Chicago. That's what I remember.
Oh,
And then every time they've been to Chicago since then, we go.
okay,
And
cool.
we have a great time.
And you brought him to a New Japan show recently too, right?
Did. I brought him to New
Yeah.
Japan was in town. I had a buddy from Boston who was in. He's like, "I wanna hang out with you and Andy." 'Cause I get a lot
Nice.
of compliments from my wife thinks it's weird that I do this, but I get a lot of compliments from people talking about how much they enjoy seeing the pictures of me and Andy at shows together. And, like, he loves pro wrestling. Like, he tells all his friends he's either gonna be a luchador or in the CIA when he grows up. So I
And
it's
he's
just
wrestling too, right?
yeah, he's an amateur wrestler, so, I mean, like, he's
Yeah.
been wrestling for 3 years and, he got a mean little headlock, so, I mean, he we live in we it's part of our culture is amateur
Right.
wrestling. We were in the wrestling room today, and, just the 2 of us, and, we were getting a workout in, and, I have a dummy, so he'll do, he'll headlock the dummy 20 times, and then I'll let him just do pro wrestling to it, and he'll run across and V-trigger it, and, I taught him how to do a frog splash today, so he was jumping onto the crash pad onto the dummy doing the frog splashes, and then we'll do a pro wrestling match after we get done with our workout, and I'll just bump around for him, and he just thinks it's the
Just let him
coolest
know he
thing.
can't do the frog splash in his one of his
Oh, he
amateur
know
bouts.
oh, believe me,
I'm
believe
just
me,
kidding.
he knows.
Yeah.
He's fully aware of that. He knows what's,
Yeah.
the differences between the 2, and he gets, when people get him confused, he gets so, snobbish already. He's like, "Look, there's a difference," and he gets all he's got his dad's,
Nice.
arrogance. So, but it's
So,
it's the best.
so what brings JD joy in pro wrestling? Something, it could be from the past if you want, or something recent, but something that you just watched. It could be a match, could be a show, could be an angle, just something that just brought you pure joy.
I lost my dad, in late February this year, and,
Yeah.
he had had stage 4, prostate cancer, and I remember just what a great dad that he was when it came to this kind of stuff. My dad, he watched pro wrestling growing up. You know, the Vern Gagne, Dick the Bruiser, AWA, WWA stuff was
Same
when
stuff I grew up
he
with.
was. Yeah, he was in the early '60s when he was watching stuff. So like when I got into it, he told me stories about Moose Cholak and Vern Gagne. Those were his guys. And when I said I wanted to go to a show, it was a WWF show at the Rosemont Horizon in 1992.
Okay.
And my dad took us, and he had zero interest in it, but he knew that his boys wanted to do this. So he never asked any questions, never put up any bit of a stink. And he went, and he would say he would just go and people watch. Like he didn't really enjoy watching wrestling anymore, but he would just go there and absorb the environment and the ambiance. And he just enjoyed spending time with his kids. So what brings me joy, and the reason I do this now is because my dad bought countless pay-per-views, um, bought me a VCR as a kid so we could have two VCRs so I could copy videotapes. So that's where I learned to do that from. Like he supported my stupid hobby for no other reason that he was my dad and he wanted me to be happy and enjoy what I was doing, and was always nothing but supportive. He took when the United Center in Chicago opened, SummerSlam '94 was the first event that was there, and he didn't think twice about buying us tickets to it.
That was
You know,
Michaels and
my
Razor.
no, that was actually it was Razor and Diesel was Walter Payton in his corner. That was Brett and Owen in the
Right,
cage.
right, right.
Brett and
Okay,
Owen in the
gotcha. Yeah,
cage, and
yeah,
Undertaker versus Undertaker, which was bleh, but Brett and Owen in the cage was pretty special.
yeah, yeah.
So
I drove around. Our pay-per-view system was down, and we had to drive around the city trying to find a place that was airing it. A very memorable show for me. But your dad bought you tickets. That is so
yeah,
cool.
my dad took us, but yeah, my brother to it. So that was just it was just one thing that we did together, and that's one reason when Andy got old enough that I wanted to take him there,
Yeah,
because my dad didn't like wrestling, but he sure liked hanging out with his
hanging out with
boys.
you. Yeah,
So
and
that's what gave me joy.
I'm sure if your son, for whatever reason, didn't like wrestling and wanted you to take him somewhere else, you'd take him there. So
Absolutely.
it's just a nice happenstance that your son actually likes wrestling. My only
Oh,
memories with my dad, and it was actually my stepdad, not my real dad, because I didn't grow up with my real dad, but my stepdad took me to a show in the 70s, and this was AWA. And back then, we had like three stations, and wrestling was on one of them. So everybody watched wrestling, and then you watched Hockey Night in Canada on CBC. So it was wrestling on CKND, and then hockey on CBC. So my dad, we watched. If you wanted to watch TV, you had to watch wrestling because that's what was on. So he took me to a show, and I remember him telling me, and I'm not sure if he believed it or if he just wanted me to believe it. I'm still not 100% sure. But it was when Vern Gagne was a champion, and he puts a sleeper on Nick Bockwinkel, and Nick Bockwinkel passes out. And the match is over, the lights come on, the show's over, people are leaving. Nick Bockwinkel's still lying in the ring. He's out. And my dad's telling me, like, the only way you can wake up from a sleeper is if somebody comes and Vern is the only one that can do it. So eventually Vern came back and like hit him in the back. And then Nick Bockwinkel woke up and he was like, like, just, oh, what's going on? Like, and it was just, and he, like, again, I think he might have actually believed it, but I'm not positive. Eventually he stopped watching wrestling, and there was a period of time when I didn't. I kind of picked it up again,
me
probably when I
too.
was about 10 or 11. WWF started airing here, and because AWA was really bad.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, WWF, if I had WCW, I would have totally been into that, but we just didn't get it. But yeah, so it's kind of cool that we can share this. And of course, I
Hmm.
share it with my daughter. I watch wrestling with my
Hmm.
daughter, and I brought her to WrestleMania a couple of years ago, and hoping to go again next year. Brought her to an AEW show. She didn't like that one as much. But I don't think it was the show itself. I just think it was the atmosphere is not the
Sure.
same. A
Different.
WWE show is colorful and bright
Hmm.
and everything, and AEW is more visceral. At
It
least it
is.
was at the time. I think
No,
it's
yeah,
changing a bit.
it is
You know,
changing. I remember WWF was in town. We live pretty rural out here,
yeah.
but Rockford's not too far from here, and WWF was doing a house show 20 minutes from the house. I'm like, hey man, you want to go and watch Cody? Because he always loved
Oh
Cody
yeah.
Rhodes. And I'm like, you want to go watch Cody? And he goes, Darby Allin going to be there? I said, "No, it's WWE." And he's like, "Not interested." And he just
Fair enough.
completely
Yeah.
completely checked out. I was like, "Oh," because I know all his friends watch WWE. They don't want he's the only
Yeah.
one that watches AEW. And I think he's becoming a little bit of an elitist where he's like, "I watch AEW in New Japan. These guys watch WWE." And I'm like, "Oh my God, you're such an arrogant little turd."
He's
Like,
already tribal.
I
Jeez.
know it's all right. He is, and we don't even.
Yeah.
I don't think I fan the flames of that, but I mean, it made me chuckle.
Yeah. That's fine. I'm sure you're influenced. Well, I mean, it's the shows you took
Sure
him
it
to,
is.
and it's his
Mhm.
favorites, right? So,
It is. He
and I'm
loves
sure
W.
like my daughter's nonverbal, but I'm sure part of the reason she maybe didn't like AEW was because Becky Lynch wasn't there.
There you go. Same.
Yeah. So,
Mhm.
yeah, and that's her favorite. So, well, JD, this has been a bunch of fun, and
It is.
I look forward to the book. I'll have a look at those tiers. I'll definitely get the book, and I'll
Oh,
get the
cool.
copy. Like I'm not a digital guy, so I'll get the either paperback or hardcover.
You get
Will you have
paper,
both?
both will be
Okay,
available.
I'll get the more expensive one. I want to help you out. And
Okay.
hopefully I'll read it. If I buy it, I'll read it. Again, it may take a while. The last book I read was the oral history of ESPN, and I think it took me a year and a half. But that was like 900 pages. So this one, oh,
That's massive. This one, like
yeah,
I said, man, I appreciate you willing to help, man. You're a good dude.
yeah.
That's awesome. And I'll be honest with you. As long as the money hits my bank account, you can do whatever you want with that book afterwards.
Well, no, no. Well, maybe I'll give it away. But yeah, so look out for that. Gaijin by JD Oliva and the Kickstarter starting on June 2nd. And again,
Mhm.
we'll post the link here. You can rewatch this and click on that link and support JD and the good work that he does. So for JD Oliva, I've been Paul Fontaine, and this has been The Joy of Wrestling.